All across the country, Republicans are trying to change the rules of our elections instead of running on their losing agenda. They know that what they're doing is unpopular. Republicans shut down the government and are letting healthcare premiums double. And Trump's trade war is sending costs through the roof for groceries and other basic needs. And the Republican budget bill added trillions to the national debt just to give a permanent tax break to the rich. None of this is popular. So Republicans are trying to redraw the maps and cut Democrats out of their seats instead of running on their record. This week, the Supreme Court reheard oral arguments in a landmark case. It's called Louisiana versus Calais, that could determine the future of the Voting Rights Act. To call this a five-alarm fire is an understatement. If the Supreme Court strikes down Article 2 of the Voting Rights Act, the one that protects minority voters from being packed into district or separated across multiple jurisdictions, the results would be catastrophic. Experts have estimated that up to 19 seats could be redrawn to favor Republicans in the upcoming midterms. This is all hands on deck, which is why we're glad to have Reyna Walters-Morgan, the DNC's Vice Chair for Civic Engagement and Voter Participation, here today to help break it down. I'm Hannah Muldaven, Deputy Communications Director for the Democrats, and your host for today. This is the Democrats' Daily Blueprint. Vice Chair Walters-Morgan, welcome to the Daily Blueprint.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, for viewers who may not be following the details of this latest case, what can you tell us about the re-arguments of Louisiana versus Calais, and why is it important?
So this case deals with the Voting Rights Act. And for those who may not know, the Voting Rights Act prevents discrimination and ensures that communities of color across the country can have meaningful representation. Section 2 is at issue here, and that section specifically has been an effective tool that prevents any practice or procedure that denies the right to vote based on race. In the past, this act has been used to eliminate poll taxes and literacy tests. It's also been critical in redistricting cases. We are really seeing efforts by Republicans to pick their voters and limit the impact of voters who don't agree with them. And that's really what's at issue here. Black voters make up 1/3 of the population in Louisiana. And a district court and federal appellate court found that the previous map that only had one majority Black district violated the Voting Rights Act. So the legislators redrew the maps and created a second Black congressional district. And when they drew this map, they really did draw this map to protect incumbents like Speaker Mike Johnson. But then another lawsuit was filed challenging the new maps. And so now the state is alleging that enforcement of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act would constitute government-mandated racial discrimination. The Supreme Court already heard arguments in this case. As you mentioned, this is a re-argument, but you should know that re-arguments are very rare. And some other cases where we've seen re-arguments in the past include the Citizens United case, Brown versus Board of Education, and Roe v. Wade. Essentially, this case threatens to destroy the protections to voters and equal representation.
And so this re-argument, as you just mentioned, which I didn't know, that's very interesting to know that not a lot of cases are re-argued. This re-argument happened this week. Did you get a chance to listen to that argument, and what were your takeaways? What are the chances that we think the Voting Rights Act is in jeopardy here?
I did listen to the arguments, and I can be very transparent in saying that I and a lot of voting rights advocates are very nervous about what this re-argument means. This Supreme Court has continually stripped away aspects of the protections offered under the Voting Rights Act. And just in the line of questioning, there do seem to be several justices who do not want to continue the Voting Rights Act. And so I think this is something we've got to be very mindful of, but also it gives us a little bit of time to prepare in case we see the worst case scenario.
And you mentioned, Vice Chair, the idea of literacy tests. That's something that we learned about, or hopefully maybe in history class in high school growing up. And that's something that we know is bad, right? The Voting Rights Act tackled that. But what we're seeing now with how some of these redistricting lines are done looks a little bit different than that type of literacy test. Can you tell us a little bit about how that looks now and why the Voting Rights Act is so important now to have, even if we might not have the literacy test like we used to have, what we have now that disenfranchises a lot of voters of color?
Well, the Voting Rights Act really ensures that voters have meaningful representation and a meaningful say in who represents them. Just to give you an idea, there are researchers who have indicated that if the Voting Rights Act is eliminated in wake of this case, that we could lose up to 30% of the current members of the Congressional Black Caucus
Wow.
and up to 11% of the current members of the Hispanic Caucus. So this will have real implications in terms of what our representation looks like and really ensuring that our representatives in Congress look like America.
Wow, that stat kind of gives me chills. That is really crazy. Now, I want to say that you do serve as the DNC's vice chair for civic engagement and voter participation. You're familiar with this role because you were the director of this program before, and you also served as a regional voter protection director on the 2016 campaign. So you've been in this space for a long time. You're an expert in this space. Over the last 10 years, how have you seen Republicans get more aggressive to undermine the vote? I'm even thinking about Donald Trump mandating the redrawing of congressional districts that we've seen Democratic legislators across the country fight against. And there's a proposition in California in a few weeks on the ballot to fight back. But from your vantage point and looking at this as an expert, how have you seen these rights being attacked by Republicans?
So they have definitely taken a much more aggressive stance in trying to limit access to voting. People need to remember that protecting the right to vote and fighting against discrimination in voting was not always a partisan issue. Mitch McConnell voted to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act in 2006, and Republican President George W. Bush signed that bill into law. But what we are seeing now is an even more aggressive approach in making it harder to vote. Republicans wanting to change the rules when they don't win elections, refusing to accept election results, changing their arguments, or I might even say lying under oath when it comes to describing how they are drawing these legislative maps. The Republicans have unfortunately proven to be a disaster when it comes to governing. And instead of creating policies that work, they just want fewer people to vote. And if they put just a fraction of the energy into creating policies that help the American people as they do into limiting and suppressing the right to vote, we would be in a much better place.
We're having this conversation amid a government shutdown that Republicans caused because they don't want to provide healthcare and affordable healthcare to Americans. They're historically unpopular. So to your point, they're trying to choose their voters because they can't govern. They're a failure when they do. It's in dark moments like these when we're reminded of the example of John Lewis, former congressman who famously crossed the Edmund-Pettus Bridge in Alabama, knowing what was waiting for him on the other side. Democrats in Congress have a proposal. It's named after the late congressman from Georgia that would restore key elements of the Voting Rights Act and protect the essential right to vote that so many people in this country fought for. What can you tell us about how these efforts are going, and how should Democrats be talking about the Voting Rights Act, especially when one of our great American heroes, Congressman John Lewis, is no longer with us as a reminder, right, of putting your literal body on the line for this right?
Democrats have been champions of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act for several years. And I believe it was, in fact, one of the first bills, I think actually the first bill that was introduced when Speaker Pelosi last held that position. And so Democrats have, for many years, really been pushing to adopt the Voting Rights Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Unfortunately, we don't have the numbers in Congress right now to get that bill passed, but we need to continue to remind people how important these protections are. And it's not a partisan issue. It is about making sure that every eligible American can cast a ballot that counts. The good news is that several states do have their own versions of the Voting Rights Act. And the states, in some instances, are really trying to pick up the slack and ensure that those protections are guaranteed for state voters, even though the federal government hasn't been able to get it across the finish line yet.
I had no idea that states had their own. That is why the federal system is important. Lastly, for people at home who are looking for ways to get involved and help us fight back, what's the best way for them to make a difference?
There are a couple of things, but the first is to vote in every single election. We can't take any election for granted, and every race, from the PTA boards to your mayor to your state elected officials, all the way up to President of the United States, do have an impact. And so, as we're thinking about this year, there are some huge elections happening this year in 2025. Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania has some critical judicial races on the line, and California with Prop 50. So, one, you've got to vote. These elections in 2025 really will make a difference in terms of how we look moving forward and our impactfulness going into 2026. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is to volunteer if you have additional time to do so. There are opportunities in person, over the phone, to really make a difference and to really help voters. Places like Pennsylvania, they have programs that you can help voters fix problems with their ballots. Maybe they don't know that there is a problem with their ballot and they have to take an action to fix it. And so you can knock on doors or make phone calls to let those people know that they've got to fix their ballots. So there's so many opportunities to get involved, but you got to do it now. And there are many opportunities to do that.
Vice Chair Walters-Morgan, thank you so much for coming on today. I learned a lot, and we will definitely get out there and vote, especially if you live in the states that you just mentioned, in November, a couple weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Walters-Morgan, for joining us. Election day is just around the corner, and here at the Daily Blueprint, we're highlighting Democrats who are running for office to improve their communities in a segment we're calling 60 Candidates in 60 Days before the November election. Today's spotlight is Michael Colombo, the Democratic nominee for Staten Island Borough President in New York City. A native Staten Islander, Michael was raised in a working-class family that valued hard work and looking out for one another. Today, he works as an insurance advocate, making sure that his clients get all the rights and protections they paid for when they purchased their policy, while fighting for the little guy when they're ignored by huge insurance companies. He would bring the same tough mentality to the office of Borough President and has vowed to work nonstop to make Staten Island safe, affordable, and a leader in innovation. To make calls, knock doors, and volunteer with the Colombo campaign, go to colombo4si.nyc. You can find the link in our video description below. Thanks for joining us today for this episode of the Daily Blueprint. We'll be here right with you every weekday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the DNC's YouTube page. Until then.